Hello, welcome to our dialogue workshop with tips, tricks, and tools to write convincing and compelling dialogue. These are just guidelines, not rules. So please also give yourself permission when you're writing, if you're working on NaNoWriMo right now, don't worry about getting it perfect. You have my full permission to write a crappy first draft and to write crappy dialogue at first. You can always come back and edit later. So these are just some tips for how to edit this later and things to keep in mind. So the purpose of dialogue comes down to basically 5 things. You should be revealing story information, moving that story forward. 2, you should be building your characters. 3, setting the tone. 4, setting the scene, the time period, and doing some world building. And 5, revealing the theme. I'll be referring to James Scott Bell a number of times throughout this presentation and this workshop. He's got a great book called Dazzling Dialogue. I can't remember the full title. We'll get to that in a bit. He said, the talk that comes out of your characters' mouths must always have a purpose. Also keep in mind that you can also reveal other points of view in your dialogue. What dialogue is not? It is not real life speech. If you were going to write as we actually speak in person, you would find that if you wrote verbatim a dialogue, I've tried to do this before, you end up finding that people sound really, really boring or really dumb or maybe insane even. It just doesn't sound, it's funny, when we hear dialogue, our brain kind of fills in the gaps and the visuals really do a lot for the entire experience. And so as authors and writers, we have this challenge of walking this line between making dialogue that sounds realistic, but isn't what we would actually hear in real life. It's not enough to simply record, this is something Philip Gerard said, it's not enough to simply record the way people actually talk. The dialogue must be concentrated, shaped, dramatically moving in a way that real life conversation seldom is. It's not always tidy. It's fine to let sentences trail off, but you're not going to be doing it to the same extent that you might hear someone else in everyday conversation doing. It's not a convenient way to just do an info dump or exposition. We'll have a whole section on that later. And it's really not intended to be a space for the author's personal ranting. You can do that in some essays and stuff like that, but if you're writing a novel, that's not really the place for that. You want to keep in mind that you want to keep it short because pages of dialogue without narrative can be boring and it can feel like a tennis match if it's going back and forth between 2 characters. You also want to avoid lengthy soliloquies or monologues. Just think about how you would feel if you were stuck sitting with a person in real life who is just going on and on and on. So keep that in mind. Also, if you have dialogue that just is unchallenged and just going on, it drains the conflict and slows down the pace of your writing. It's okay to have a lot of dialogue, but it's important to keep it mixed in with narrative and action. And you'll hear me say this a few times tonight. Reading it out loud is such an amazing tool, and it's a free tool that we all have at our disposal. It's one of the best tools in our toolbox because when you read it silently, your brain fools your eyes into reading things that are not there, or it might seem like it sounds good on the page. But once you speak it out loud, it really helps you pick up on the nuances that your eyes don't see. And if you want to get an extra level of distance between yourself and the writing, you can use naturalreaders.com or the text-to-speech function with Word or Google Docs. It's under accessibility options. And that really helps you have a better feel for how that dialogue and your story in general flows. Also, we meet every other Monday night for reading out loud, or if you're writing memoirs, every Thursday night, and you have an opportunity to read out loud there as well and get some feedback. You also want to avoid small talk. Alfred Hitchcock said, "What is drama but life with the dull bits cut out?" So skip those hi, how are yous. That doesn't drive the story forward and it just slows the pace down. So jump right in with the action. And by entering the conversation in progress, the reader is spared all those boring details. Now we're on to the info dump or exposition. So what info dumping is, it's a clunky and lazy way to convey information about characters, scene, and backstory. It jars the reader out of the experience and reminds them that they are reading a book instead of experiencing it. So you never want to have your characters tell each other things that they already know or that they never would have said, or if you don't want to have them saying something they shouldn't know yet. So signs of info dumps and dialogue. If the text is something that you as a writer want to say, and it's not something that the character themselves really has any motivation to say, that's a sign it might be an info dump. Also, if the character goes into a long explanation of why they did something, unless that's really true to that character, that's another sign it might be an info dump. The words as you know, or you might remember, sure signs, info dump. And if no one is doing anything, or whatever the scene is, the conversation lacks an emotional response from any of the characters in the scene, that's another sign it might be an exposition. So avoiding those info dumps is really important because it can bore the reader and it actually can insult the reader. And that's, not something you want to do when your readers want to throw your book down. They are notoriously found at the beginning of the story when it's most critical to hook your readers. Many times you can actually just take out the first, like some people say, take out the first chapter, the first page, the first paragraph of your story. And usually it seems strange, but it's usually better for it. Ask yourself how much the reader really needs to know right now. And by leaving things to be discovered later, it can be an effective way to keep the reader wanting to know more. Info dumps sound stilted and unnatural. For example, as you know, Mary, we met in Chicago 4 years ago. Our lives sure have changed since then. And you don't want to write that way. Nobody speaks that way. But simply changing the order around can make it sound more natural. Can you believe how much has changed since we met at that crappy sports bar in Chicago? So just by changing around the order and adding that little bit, the crappy sports bar also gave us a little specificity and made that feel a lot more natural. And for the love of God, please don't do this. Hello, Bob, my mother's boyfriend. Welcome into my home that I share with my roommate Stephanie and our cats. No one speaks like that. Don't do that. So how do you fix info dumps? Ask yourself again if the information is something you want to say or if your characters want to say. So here's an example of information you might want to get across. Give me that rope. I learned how to tie a noose back when I was going through my pirate phase. Info that your characters might want to get across or avoid. Jack, where did you learn to tie a noose? Jack looked away. Oh, I learned it in the Scouts. Now was not the time to go into his dodgy past. Dialogue tags. This is something that is kind of controversial. There are a lot of differing opinions on the dialogue tags. As what really it comes down to is mixing things up. A dialogue tag should be like a punctuation mark. It guides the reader without really calling attention to itself. You should only use them when they are needed. And have some faith in your readers. Use the character voice and action beats when possible. And it can feel weird to say said or asked asked all the time, but honestly, those are the most unobtrusive ways to say it. We use said and asked so many times in normal conversation that it's almost invisible. And so it's fine to use things like shouted, whispered, and mumbled, but only do that when the character really is shouting, whispering, or mumbling, and don't do it just because you're getting tired of saying said or asked. Chances are the reader isn't really going to notice how many times you say this unless it's too much. So ways you can get around just always saying he said, she said is using dialogue action beats. Dialogue action beats are typically standalone sentences that break up the dialogue and indicate who is speaking. They reveal details about the characters in the scene, Again, though, too many of them can draw attention to themselves and take the reader out of the experience. Jerome Stern said, dialogue is not just quotation, it's grimaces, pauses, adjustments of mouse buttons, doodles on a napkin, and crossings of legs. You can reveal emotion with body language. For example, Josh tapped his fingers on the table. Tell me again where you were last night. You can reveal scenery and setting with dialogue action beats. I just don't know. Jenny gazed at the smoldering ruins of the home. You can reveal character traits and relationships. I like what you've done with your hair. Josh twirled a finger through a chin-length auburn curl. And you can also use action beats instead of a dialogue tag and not just in addition to it. So these two examples, you can hear which one's better. Read it and weep, she said, dropping the letter on Josh's lap. That works fine, but it's better to say, read it and weep. She dropped the letter on Josh's lap. It just is clearer, more direct, and keeps that pace moving forward. Don't rely on adverbs. Adverbs can be used with dialogue tags, but what you're doing is you're telling the reader what to feel instead of letting them actually feel it. So an example would be, my mom has cancer, she said sadly. Or you could say, my mom has cancer, she said, not meeting Jenny's eyes. You can see that you get the same idea across, but it's a lot more effective when you use some body language to instead of just a simple adverb. Also, using too many adverbs will make your readers really want to throw your book across the room, burn it. At least I do. For example, if a dialogue went like this, I can't find my car keys, she said worriedly. Did you look in the car? John asked skeptically. Oh no, not again, she said wretchedly. Maybe you should wear them on your wrist, he said smugly. Yeah, don't do that. And don't use that many dialogue tags in general. It's just too much. I'm sure you've heard Stephen King and a lot of people say how much they dislike adverbs. Stephen King went as far as to say, the road to hell is paved with adverbs, and I will shout it from the rooftops. To put it another way, they're like dandelions. If you have one in your lawn, it looks pretty and unique. So I think the adverbs do get kind of a bad rep. I think that one or two of them are fine, but it's just so often we see too many of them, and that's when it really starts being a problem. You can find that most adverbs end in ly. So if you are trying to cut down on your adverbs, try using the edit find feature to quickly identify adverbs. So here's a little example of which you might think is stronger here. Put it down, she shouted. Give it back, he pleaded. It's mine. Don't be such a fool, Jekyll. Or, put it down, she shouted menacingly. Give it back, he pleaded objectively. It's mine. Don't be such a fool, Jekyll, Utterson said contemptuously. It's even hard to read. It's just too many words. It takes away that forward momentum, and it's telling instead of showing. And for the love of God, don't say whispered quietly, yelled loudly, sobbed defeatedly. I mean, it's already obvious. If they're whispering, it's quiet. If they're shouting or yelling, it's loud. Studies have shown that 70 to 93% of communication is nonverbal. So using body language is a really big deal when you're writing a convincing story. Here's an example of a sentence without body language, sorry. Tell me again where you were last night, she said angrily. Or you could say with body language, tell me again where you were last night. She crossed her arms, narrowed her eyes, and waited. And now we're going to have our first activity. There's a link here. I'm going to copy it and put it into the chat. All right, that was 10 minutes. How'd it go?
Good. It was a good exercise.
Good. Anybody have anything that they'd like to share? Shefka, you're on mute if you're saying something.
I'll share one.
Okay.
I'll share one.
Great.
I was trying to emulate confusion, so let me know if I got this across. Mackie tilted his head, his brow wrinkling with heavy set lines. How is this meant to work exactly?
Yeah, definitely. Well done.
UN agency of 18 Arab states. After Secretary General Guterres rightly instructed her to remove an absurd report which accused Israel of, quote,
I
apartheid.
think actually, hi everybody, it's
Hi,
Thais.
Thais.
Oh,
Is that
I think I got a little, oh, sorry, what?
Oh, I guess we were hearing the TV in the background, I think.
oh, it's something. Yeah, I thought
Oh,
somebody was
yeah,
speaking.
that's, okay, let me put myself back on mute. I'll just put it in the chat.
Okay. Well,
Okay, I got I started actually, it was actually good because it kind of got me into my story where I was stuck a little bit. So I wrote, Maya's face was flushed when they finally returned, when they finally arrived back at the committee's table. Her smile wide as she responded to Dahlia's questions. Did Tika come with you willingly? Reaching for her sister, they nodded in unison. I see. Dahlia's regal head rose, her arms outstretched, she spoke. It seems celebration is what is needed. Letting out a rare screech of joy, she began the dance herself, and the drumming followed.
oh, I can't wait to hear that part of the story. Excellent.
Me too, I haven't written it. So thank you for that.
I just got a little bit, Sharon crinkled her nose. What did you think would happen, you fool? Did you think they'd give you a prize? Well, Jackson brow furrowed as he sputtered for words. I just didn't think. That's right, you didn't think. You never do. Lord knows why I'm surprised. All right. Anybody else have
This
anything?
was a great awakening. This was a great way to think about it, like to think about how to use body language in there and look at it in a very specific way.
Good.
And so
Good.
it's great.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to play around with it some more.
There's
Thank you for
also
that.
There's like an emotional thesaurus that I've heard a lot of people talk about. But I don't know. I find this website seems to be really helpful to me. So glad to hear it was helpful for you.
Yeah.
Well,
Oops.
Christine?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to go
Yeah,
off
can
camera.
I read
Sure.
a sentence from my last chapter that I wrote that I think has a lot of body language in it, in
Yeah.
the dialogue? Let's see here. Okay. Bodo, that's you? He grew another inch, chest puffed out. So, growing with pride. Yeah, that's my latest creation. Baya, Bodo Baya is my name that is. And the lady in the picture, what's her name? Bodo Baya shrugged, tilted his head, and stabbed his forefinger at the splotch in the drawing. And then, so you really want to know? He asked me so what do you think of it? He pressed again. You really want to know? Now I tilted my head, resting my chin in my open palm. I'm speechless. And then internal dialogue, interpret that any way you want, asshole. And now I threw back my freshly burgundy dyed hair, which was parted down the center and fell to my waist. Batting my Cleopatra cold-rimmed eyes, I turned and walked back to my table. So,
Excellent.
yeah, it's a lot of body language in there.
Yeah.
So.
You're really good at dialogue. And I had asked if I could take a little bit, and I had copied a line out of the last chapter that you read for us, but I lost it somewhere, so it did not make it into the presentation.
Do you remember which chapter it was? I may be able to find it for you quickly.
It was the one where you were going to to get a tutor.
Oh yeah, that's the one before this one.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on, it's right here. I can find it real quick.
So while she's doing that, I was saying, looking at Thais's here, and it's just very in-depth with the bitter plague. That was interesting. A bitter plague wrapped itself around his words. evil shall whip you to and fro upon this here salvation. And then go on, get in the back room. A twisted smile corrupted his smooth skin.
Mhm. Very vivid. Yeah. Great. Okay. Ingrid, I think we're going to go ahead and keep on
Yeah, go
going.
ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
And there's going to be more activities later, and you can share that once if you find it.
Well, there's a lot of dialogue in that particular chapter. I'm looking at it, so I don't know which line.
It
we're
was
talking about.
right when you were getting to the table, and he was sitting there with his girlfriend.
Ah, okay, at the beginning. Okay, here we go.
Forget about that part.
Okay.
I'm finding my way back.
Oh, we had a wonderful time in Mallorca, didn't we, Liebling? Jürgen with his mouth full of ham sandwich nodded. Mm-hmm. That it?
Yes.
Something like that. Yeah.
And one thing you need to be aware of is using tags. They're not actually speech tags. So sighed, smiled, laughed, moaned, gasped, groaned, chuckled, cackled, snickered. These are all words that you can use within dialogue, but they're not speech words. And so, like the example I've given here, Jesse chuckled. You know what? I think you're really cool. Try chuckling and saying something at the same time. It just doesn't work. So you can still say it exactly the same way, but instead of having a comma, it should be a period there. And you can also do the same thing using the word said if it's a different structure to the sentence here. So example is, oh my God, I love you. You are such a dork, Sheila said, smiling, snickering. Or you could just say, oh my God, I love you. You're such a dork, Sheila snickered. Either one of those works. And you want to avoid repetition in dialogue tags. So you'll see repetition a number of ways. If you're always using the dialogue at the end of the sentence, the dialogue tags, it can get really stilted and boring. So you want to mix it up. For example, you know what? I really like you, said Jesse. Oh my God, I love you. You're such a dork, replied Sheila. Sheesh, get a room, guys, exclaimed Ashley. You can see how that just, the rhythm gets weird when you have it always in the same place. So it's better to mix it up like this. You know what? Jesse asked. I really like you. Sheila stopped to laugh. Oh my God, I love you. You're such a dork. Sheesh, get a room, guys, Ashley exclaimed. And another place you might see too much repetition is if you use too many action beats. So another example using the same is, you know what? Asked Jesse as she turned to Sheila with a smile. I really like you. Oh my God. Sheila stopped her bike and leaned forward. I love you. You're such a dork. Sheesh, get a room, guys, exclaimed Ashley as she curled her lip and turned to go. So you can definitely overdo it. You don't want to
I never heard the word really. What does that mean? Is that a way of saying really?
Yeah, it's a joke.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It's just supposed to be funny. Okay. Like, I wheelie. She was on a bike.
Like on a bike, wheelie, wheel.
Yeah. Also another place where you see some, it's not exactly repetition, but it's definitely a good way to avoid using too many dialogue tags by using people's names. And so let your characters use each other's names, but don't overdo it. So here's what not to do. Hey, Chase, want to go to lunch? Nah, John, can't afford it. But you just buy a new car? You must be loaded, Chase. Why do you think I'm broke, John? We don't talk that way in real life. So it's better you can just use it once and it still gets the point across. Hey, Chase, want to go to lunch? Nah, can't afford it. Didn't you just buy a new car? You must be loaded. Why do you think I'm broke? So you see it just flows better without having the names used so many times.
But Christina, I thought that we did talk like that. I mean, when I talk to you, Christina, I talk to you all the time. And call you oh, sorry, my joke didn't work very well.
just mix it up and then we're good. And I'm going to say it one more time. Read out loud I'll say it one more time before we're done, actually. Another thing you can do is giving your characters a task. I really like doing this. If you have action in between the speech, then it can reveal the environment, it can reveal relationship dynamics, and create tension, and it can move the plot forward. So I love these multi-purpose sort of ways to handle your dialogue and move your story along. So an example here is Lisa handed Jeff a screw, which he, of course, immediately dropped. The sound echoed against the high ceilings, and the unpacked boxes did little to deaden the clatter. Maybe you should let me take over, Butterfingers. If you weren't hovering, I'd have done this already. Get. Jeff tried to shoo her away and swept the remaining screws to the floor. We have another activity. So using what you've learned so far, let's take our characters on a quest. You can choose any characters you want, any of the characters in these images here, or your own characters in your own stories. Here are some example quests, activities they could be doing together. I haven't had a picture of a cat yet, so I had to put a cat in here. So you could write about characters trying to get a cat into a spacesuit. I'm sure that would be a trick. Anything?
What does that mean? Take 10 minutes to use the use.
Oh, it's supposed to say
something wrong
use what
there.
you've learned. Sorry. Use what you've learned so far, and
Okay.
let's just take our characters on a quest and just play with it. Use your action beats. Try to reveal the environment. Show some character relationships. Vary where those dialogue tags fall. Use some body language, and mix up what kind of dialogue tags you're using, and also minimize the dialogue tags as well. So there's also a link here if you don't like any of these prompts or just want it's a cool generator that will give you random conflicts for your characters to use. So now we're going to talk about character development through dialogue. So some factors to consider for giving characters unique voices. Think about their vocabulary, what their education level is, what field they work in, whether they like to use big words to seem smart or important. If they're skateboarders, surfers, doctors, executives, kindergarten teachers, all of those kinds of people are going to have different phrases and slangs that are specific to that group. So you can try to use some of those through your vocabulary. If English is not the first language of the character, the words might be out of order. So think about the syntax. And speech patterns. You can think about like pet words and phrases that different characters like to use. If they are really eloquent, or if they are just to the point, if they tend to trail off in their speech, or if they're impatient, if they're interrupting people. So think about what you want to say about your character using some of these patterns. And also think about regionalisms. If someone's from a different area of the country, somebody might say soda, somebody else might say pop, that sort of thing. Think about the age. You're going to talk a lot differently if they're really old or if they're really young. And obviously the personality, if they're shy, bold, gruff, grumpy, cheerful. Also think about the motives. If the characters are hiding something, that's something that's really good to kind of hint at within the dialogue. And also think about dynamics as far as who's talking to who. If your character is trying to talk to their mother, they're going to have a different way of speaking than if they're talking to their best friend. And also it's really important for your character voice to make sure that it's consistent. And so I would suggest using like character sheets, notes on each character so that you can make sure that this stays constant throughout your story so people can really get to know your characters and have it flow. This is an example from one of my favorite series, The Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. So I'll just read you a little excerpt that he does from Peace Talks. Just so long as you understand that my night is a part of my house, do not attempt to eat my porridge, Miss Wraith. You will find it neither hot nor cold, nor just right, because unlike Goldilocks, the bears will have eaten you. Am I understood? Entirely, Lara said, inclining her head to Mab. Her eyes lingered on me for a moment. Are you sure what I ask isn't too much trouble? Such things are part and parcel of his duties, Mab said, assuming you find him acceptable. Oh my, Lara said, glancing at me again. Oh yes. I didn't much like the sound of where this conversation was going, so I cleared my throat and said, Ladies, I'm sitting right here. I can hear you. So I love how this example, there are not any adjectives here. There are no adverbs here. There's nothing really done to describe what these people look like or what their interactions, what kind of relationships they have with each other. It's all done through dialogue. You can see, like with this Mab character, you can see how she says, am I understood? You can see that she's kind of got this archaic kind of way of speaking. And then you've got this more playful person, Lara, and you can see that she's inclining her head to Mab, inferring some kind of that she is, not, she's subservient in a way to the first character here. And then you see a completely different character in this last person with his kind of sarcastic tone. So this is just a really nice example, I think, of how you can show a lot of character development in really short space with dialogue. And now here's a time for another activity. This is something from James Bell Scott. I mentioned him earlier. His book is called How to Write Dazzling Dialogue, the Fastest Way to Improve Any Manuscript. He gave this list of 28 different types of characters. So choose 1 to 3 characters from this list or use your own characters and just brainstorm what kind of words, tone, mood, anything that might make these characters sound unique. Practice speaking or writing some dialogue for them using those words that you've come up with. Don't think about it too much, just do it. Doesn't matter how accurate you are. What you're doing is stretching your mind to come up with a unique sound. So I'm going to set the timer for 10 minutes again, and I'll leave the screen up so you can choose what you'd like to write about.
Good. It was a good exercise.
Good. I got something really rough. It shows the gentleman thief. Oh, I say, I believe your earring has fallen into my pocket. Gregory held the earring up to the light to examine it. Heavens, is that a real diamond? I see nary an inclusion. If I were you, I'd be mighty careful of it falling into another's pocket. You see, not all men you find here are as honest as me, miss. Didn't get very much of the other things we had talked about in here, but it was fun to play around with a different voice.
That's good. I like the British gentleman, the British highwayman.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything they'd like to share?
I've got the elderly martial arts master, a
there.
classic trope. I wrote that this character would be a very disciplined and focused character type, would use words that express their inner high standards for themselves and others, and lean on a rigid worldview and wealth of knowledge. They would almost always speak with authority. The one line of dialogue I had an example for this was, speak not with your mouth, speak with your days, speak with every action and every struggle you choose to endure.
I like that.
Yeah, I do too.
It reminds me of a quote I saw recently. It was something like, as you do one thing is as you do everything, or something. It was something more eloquent than that, but I think you said it better. Anyone else?
I'm not sure if I did the assignment correctly,
Okay.
but because I wasn't sure if it was supposed to be just all dialogue and nothing else. Is that what it was supposed to be?
Well, it was just an activity, not to think too much about it, just trying to find a way into some unique characteristics and words and things that these characters might use. So I had written out a few words, and then I just crammed them into a dialogue. is what
Oh, I
did.
see. Okay. I just started going, I don't know. I think I tried to get 3 distinct characters, but let's see. Hand me the beaker, Dale, and get the fortified solution from the fridge. The time has finally come to see if my creation has breath. You are about to witness the future, dear one. Look, Doc, I may be cute, like you say, but I'm no dainty flower, and I've seen plenty of things for the first time, so don't expect me to be shocked, you hear? I will be. What do you think? We will see. Think she'll be hungry? Oh, for God's sake, Beanie, it's a thing. It ain't no damn girl like me. You don't have to be a meanie. Will someone please bring me the solution so I can make history, have the change, make history and have change and change the very course of humanity? Why don't you get it, Beanie, since you're so damn excited? Beanie ran up and kicked Darlene in the shin. Just wait, you little 2-bit bean sprout. Once this thing is woke, I'm sickening on you. This transcendental, transformative, highly intelligent being will do no such thing.
You definitely have 3 very distinct voices there. I can see the differences in age and the differences in vocabulary and demeanor. That was cool.
Yeah,
I
I
was
like
trying to play different.
I like the older demeanor clashing against the young demeanor. That was very well done.
It was an interesting exercise.
I enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Anyone else? Anyone have anything else to share before we move on? All right. So, setting the scene through dialogue. As I mentioned earlier, we want to avoid the talking head syndrome, where you have these figures that are just having this dialogue in a vacuum. In order to envelop your readers in your world, you really need a setting, whether or not your story takes place in current day or medieval times or in the future, whatever. You want to be aware of scenes that have no description of the setting at all. So if you just put a few specific concrete descriptions of setting, they can really ground the conversation between the characters and draw the reader into the scene. And dialogue also can really reveal aspects of the world through the little things that are going on in between the scenes, in between, in those action beats and in the narrative in between, and what the characters say to each other. So some things to consider is to ensure that the slang you use is appropriate for your story's time period. So for example, the reason why I have this silly picture of a medieval scene over here to the left is that if you're setting your story in medieval England, you don't want to use the word okay. It wasn't really a thing back then. As I mentioned, you can reveal your setting through the action beats. You can show the tone and the mood through the setting. So an example here, Bob, her eyes were fixed to her own fingers, worrying over the cracks in the red checked vinyl tablecloth. There's something I need to tell you. So it gives you just that cracks in the red checked tablecloth, gives you an image of where this is, and kind of brings that down into a real scene instead of just these people floating around in a vacuum. Here's another example. This is from Barbara Kingsolver in her first novel, The Bean Trees. Take this baby, she said. Where do you want me to take it? She looked back at the bar and then looked at me. Just take it. I waited a minute, thinking that soon my mind would clear and I would understand what she was saying. It didn't. The child had the same round eyes. All 4 of those eyes were hanging there in the darkness, hanging on me, waiting. The Budweiser sign blinked on and off, throwing a faint light that made the whites of their eyes look orange. So you can see she's told us that it's nighttime, that this baby's eyes look exactly the same as the person who she's speaking with, and that they're at a bar, they're outside of a bar or inside of a bar. There's this Budweiser sign that's blinking off and on, and you've really got kind of this ominous sort of a feeling in this really short piece of dialogue here. Another quote from James Scott Bell is to think about your character's agenda. Be clear on every character's agenda in a scene and the agendas that are in conflict. Before you write, take just a moment to write down what each character in the scene wants, even if, as Kurt Vonnegut once said, it's only a glass of water. Another thing that he suggests doing is to use a voice journal. The voice journal is a free-form document, stream of consciousness in the character's own voice. How do I know what the character's voice sounds like? He said, I prompt them with questions and then let them talk. I do this fast without thinking about it much. What I'm waiting for is the moment when characters start talking to me in a voice I did not plan, and it always happens. That's the fun part, when the character starts to take on a life for me. We don't want our characters sounding the same when they speak, and the voice journal helps you avoid that condition. And that's again from his book, How to Write Dazzling Dialogue. There are tons of rules about punctuation for dialogue. I considered going into some of them, but I didn't want to bore you to death. Here's the most basic way of formatting your dialogue. I'm sure you guys all know this already. I found this really great guide, this thorough guide at selfpublishingschool.com, How to Write Dialogue. And that's a clickable link when I send you the presentation. It's got a lot of really great examples and advice, not only on just punctuation there. There's a whole list of resources that I use to pull this together. There's some really great. Yeah. Go ahead.
Can I ask a question about that? I don't know if you know the answer to this or not, but this is something I've been struggling with within dialogue, within the punctuating of dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
So you know how it says like you're supposed to format whenever a new person is speaking to start a new line.
Mm-hmm.
But what if you are, I think where I get tripped up is when there's narrative in between the dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, if one character is speaking and then the next character is going to begin to say something, but before they say something, there's some description of what that other character is doing or something like that. And so I question whether or not when the actual dialogue begins, I have to go to another line, even if it's a couple of words.
Yeah, that's the way it works. Even if it's just a couple of words, as long anytime you have you shouldn't ever really have two people speaking within the same paragraph. It's always going to be on a separate line.
But what if it's the same person then?
If it's the same person, it can be, as long as it's still related to the same topic.
Then you can just continue, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And an earlier one that you had, I don't remember which, I should have stopped you then. I was about to stop you then, but I didn't. There was an earlier example that you were using where it showed the character like a narrative. And it didn't start a new line. So I was confused by it. I think it was much earlier. Was it? It was one.
Okay, can I read one line from the little cooking story I wrote where I have an example for that? When I said, nah, I had Chinese yesterday, period. I wrinkled my nose, period. And then I continue, how about we stay home and cook? I put all that in the same line.
Yeah, that's
that way.
pieces
Okay,
of-
that makes, that's the same two people, right?
No,
I mean,
it's
that's
the
one
same
person.
The same
Yeah.
person talking, yeah. But yeah, with interrupted by I wrinkled my nose comes in between the two parts of the dialogue by the same person.
And here's like an example. If Lisa was talking at the beginning of this paragraph, and there could be this little narrative in between, and then since it's still her speaking, it can go right there in the same paragraph, and it doesn't go to the next paragraph until somebody else speaks.
So that this is kind of what I was saying here. So like, you don't feel like you need to start maybe on a new line here.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because that's one of the ways that I use often to avoid having to say he said, she said. And by having
Right.
this in the same paragraph like this, you can tell that it's Lisa speaking. And so if I put it on its own line, then it's not really clear necessarily who's speaking.
Yeah, I think I need to look back at that, because I think oftentimes there's dialogue that's going, but say I'm starting to do the description of the next person who's about to speak,
Mhm.
instead of starting the new line when I've started talking about that person, I wait to start the new line until they've actually said a word.
Mm.
And so like, I know in other feedback that I've gotten, it's like, oh, you should put this on another line.
Yeah, if
'Cause
in
if
that
that makes
example,
sense.
what you're talking about, I think, is as soon as you start talking about that other person who's going to be speaking, that's when I would put it on another line. And then have once you have that description done, don't return, have it be just embedded in that same paragraph so that we know that that description is attached to the person who's speaking.
Okay. Thank you, that's helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for asking. It's a good point.
Sorry, just a quick thing. Christine, I put in the chat, there's one paragraph that I wrote, and I literally wrote, maybe the conversation would have gone something like this. And then I start the dialogue. And I don't know if, I'm pretty much like maybe doing like 3 or 4 like don't do's in this, which is like, okay, am I saying the names too often? I'm putting it in the same paragraph. At the same time, it's not a real discussion. You know what I mean? It's not real dialogue, right? So does that still, do I still have the same rules in that way?
That's an excellent question. And I'm not sure of the answer, to be honest. If this was an actual dialogue, I would say definitely you'd want to have it broken out. So I'll just read this out loud, what you've written here. Maybe the conversation would have gone something like this. Sure, Thais, I get it. You weren't happy. And then I would have return. No, it's not just that. It's that I need to be fulfilled to have a greater purpose in my life. Return. Fine. So take the job now and figure the rest out later. Return. Yes, Eve, but I need to know now what my next steps are. I can't keep pretending I'm happy. So if this was a normal conversation, I would say you definitely need those returns, those on separate lines. Ingrid, you are you're quite good at this sort of thing. Do you have anything to chime in with?
No, not really. I'm pretty much winging it. And then when I read it out loud, it becomes usually clear in my head where the returns, where the new paragraphs should start. When I read it out loud, it works better. Yeah. But basically what you say, when whatever one person says, I put it in one paragraph, even if this actual speech is interrupted by descriptive narrative. It still belongs in the same paragraph, because then the person keeps on saying something else. But when the next person speaks, I definitely start the new paragraph.
Mhm.
Yeah, but this one is a little bit tricky because it's not dialogue. I mean, it is, but it isn't.
Yeah, it's
So,
fabricated.
I don't know. That one's
I would
tricky.
say it would probably still follow the same rules.
Yeah, I think to be safe, I don't think you probably wouldn't go wrong by having it follow the same rules, but it might be okay to do it this way too. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I have a lot of cases where someone is saying something to me, and in response to that, I have some internal dialogue, and I put that right next to that person's speech in the same paragraph, although it's me having the internal dialogue, but it belongs with what that person is saying to me. For example, if she says, "Oh, little girl," and then, I'm saying, there he goes again with that little girl. I put that right next to it in the same paragraph. So that may not be right, but that's the way I've been doing it. So maybe some editor will come along later and tell me, no, you can't do that.
I would have that as a separate
Yeah.
line.
Okay.
Even though it's a thought.
Yeah, because it's as if it's your inner voice speaking.
Yeah, it's my inner voice. Yeah. Okay, then maybe I'll have to go through that again and correct those.
Good questions.
Thanks, guys.
Let's see. I think we're getting to the end here. Again, you guys know reading it out loud is again, as Ingrid was saying, such a helpful tool. Community is here to help. We have, with Happy Writing, we have meetings on Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursdays. Shop and Write Munich meets on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays. So we have every day of the week covered. I just realized today. So join a local chapter. If you're facing a challenge, chances are someone else has been there and can offer a helping hand or at least a sympathetic ear. I know some of you already have donated. If you feel like this was helpful, feel free to leave a donation. No worries if not. And this is a different version of the couple of slides got left in from my last presentation. Sorry about that. I'll clean that up. But here are our socials, and I'm going to copy in this link. If you'll enter your email, if you click on this link here, this will give you a place where you can enter your email, and I'll send you a copy of this presentation. And that reaches the end. So does anyone have any questions or comments before we wrap up?
Firstly, thank you for the wonderful seminar. It was very good. It was very insightful. I had a couple of questions.
Victor, were you going to say something?
Yes. I just wanted to ask you, in regards to dialogue, I've noticed going through the editing phases of manuscripts, there are a few mistakes that you can make in your first draft that really make that rewrite much more difficult than it has to be. When it comes to dialogue, what do you think are the most important elements to get right in your first draft dialogue to make your life easier when it comes time to freshening it up and rewriting it?
I typically write memoir. So I am coming from a different place. When I'm writing dialogue, it's dialogue that actually happened. So I don't write much fiction. I'm going to be honest and tell you that I don't have a good answer for you what you might face, one of your biggest challenges would be for fiction. I think you can fix anything later. Plot holes are going to be the hardest thing to fix, but that's not necessarily attached to dialogue.
Okay.
But does anyone else have any comments on that is a fiction writer?
I just hope I'm not doing them, which I probably am.
I wish I had a better answer for you.
That's all right. That's all right.
It's a good question.
Fiction writers definitely struggle with this a lot more. Dialogue can be a really difficult thing to deal with in fiction, especially on the rewrite.
I deal with that problem very often, just like you. and I always want to get it right the first time. I'm absolutely perfectionist, and of course it isn't perfect the first time. So what I started to do is to jot down a commentary on the side, just make a commentary to deal with it later, which says you have to put in something about events happening before, or something I have to think of when I edit this.
Mm,
I put in a commentary with a shortcut of things I don't have to forget.
that's a good point, because you can feel a bit lost when you go back so far in a story and you're like, oh bugger, what was I trying to do here? So
Yes,
that's a
I
good
see the
point.
gaps as I write them, and I fill in the gaps with a commentary that says, attention, gap here. Do something about it, and to put it short.
That's a good tip. Thank you.
Mhm.
That's good.
Yeah, that's a good tip. I suppose the consistency in the voice is also
Mhm.
important. And it's like that's one of the things, if you keep a character sheet to keep kind of notes on different ticks and different characteristics of that character, I think that can be helpful. I bet Scrivener has something for that. Do you use Scrivener?
Scrivener has everything. Scrivener
And
Scrivener is a gift from God. That program is the best thing to happen to novelists since the printing press, I tell you.
Oh yes, love to hear that. We're trying to get Anita to start using Scrivener.
I've got the free trial, so
You
I
have
just
to,
haven't
Anita.
imported the document in yet.
It's a one-time purchase. You have it for life. It's awesome. It's amazing.
Yeah, it seems amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll second that. I have the trial right now, but then after Nano, I'll download the. Yeah.
Yeah, I think last year at least you got a pretty big discount. It's so cheap
Yeah.
anyway.
It's like
Without
I
the
know it is cheap. Anyway, I think it's $50 normally, and
Yeah.
after Nano, you can get it for 25.
Yeah.
And
And
it's a good tool to use for memorists as well, not just
Oh,
novel
yeah.
writers.
Mm,
Yeah.
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 Maybe
Academic writing,
Yeah,
any short
anything.
story, anything.
It's
I
a
should look
tool
at
that
it.
really you can make it as complicated as you want it to be. It can be a very simple program that just keeps you organized, or it can be an incredibly complex way to keep your ideas in one place. It's
Mhm.
great at that.
Yeah, I was using Google Docs before. I was also using Evernote,
Mhm.
and it just wasn't powerful enough. It just wasn't. It was too many. What do you call it? Too many. I felt like there were a lot of cooks in my
You've got
kitchen.
everything in different places is the problem I feel.
Yeah,
The great thing about
that's what it is.
Scrivener is it's all just there in one place. Like that's the power of it.
Yeah, and you can like do a search and you'll get all of the results for that character name, or I found myself writing the same scene over and over again for my memoir, and then I'd get halfway through it and I'd be like, wait a minute, I think I've written this already. And I could do a search and I could just find, oh yeah, there it is. It has a lot of functionality. Like Victor was saying, you can go as deep, make it as complicated or easy as you like. We've been talking about having like a special workshop just for Scrivener. Problem is there's so many different ways of using it that it's like the way I use it is completely different from the way Beth uses it. And
maybe that's what it is actually, is that different people sharing how they use it so people can get ideas.
Mm.
Yeah, we might just have like a chit chat session where we all say what we like about it.
I know for a couple of my writing friends that I got onto Scrivener when I showed them my project and how I kind of go through setting up a Scrivener project. They immediately, it kind of clicked in their heads. They were like, I see what you're doing here. I see, like when you see the 50 different items in the bar, people just go, oh my God, I can't set that up. But when they see what it's all for and how you set it up, they start to get kind of like a better idea about it.
Yeah, that's exactly what just happened to me this week.
Good.
So,
Well, thank you all for joining. Great seeing everyone.
Thank you for the workshop. It was fantastic. Guys, enjoy the last little part of your weekend, and I'll see you all
Thanks.
later.
All right.
yes, nice to meet you all
Hope
and
to
see
you again.
those I know.
Awesome. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. It was really nice. Bye.